The original 2004 Star Wars Battlefront is a title many remember fondly. While you might have originally picked it up, either because of the franchise it's a part of, or because it just seemed like a novel thing to try at the time, surely if you're watching this video, it's because Battlefront 1 left an impression on you. And not without good reason to either. It is simply a fun game, and one that's still being enjoyed by plenty of people, even now 2 decades, a couple spin-offs, a sequel, and a whole franchise reboot later. And I want to make the case that the reason the original Battlefront has lasted so long isn't just because of the brand name it's attached to, or the story, or the nostalgia factor alone, but specifically because as a team-based shooter, it shows off some of the best map design in gaming, period. So please join me as I briefly break down what makes each of the original Star Wars Battlefront's maps so good. Today, I want to talk about what I think of as being the original Battlefront's most climactic map, Rhen Harbour. One of the great things about Battlefront, I would argue, is how it successfully emulated the feeling of not just merely fighting in the Star Wars setting, but actually taking part in proper pitched battles. The maps in this game aren't just locations two opposing sides happen to find themselves running around and shooting at one another in. They're battlefields with distinct lines of demarcation and often a realistic attacker-defender dynamic which feels accurate to the setting. There's quite a few maps in the game which go above and beyond with this basic conceit. They're typically the largest in the game and feature a lot of turrets and emplacements and have a lot of room for vehicles. I've noticed these are often the maps most directly inspired by the big battles of the movies. Hoth and Geonosis both come to mind, for instance. But there's one map in the game that I think successfully captures that feeling of a large, climactic battle at least as well as those two. And perhaps more impressively, it's the one set on the planet in the game with no basis from the movies to pull from. So the whole thing had to be created from the ground up by the Battlefront designers. It manages to evoke the feeling of a big impending battle almost from its aesthetic design alone, but everything about the layout of the map's usable gameplay areas and how that informs how battles here play out only adds to the experience. And that's the map I wanted to discuss today, the aforementioned Rhen Harbour. So let's talk about it. Gameplay in Battlefront all revolves around the command post system. This is where you and your vehicles all spawn in. They represent points of interest on the map, and even just controlling them passively affects how many reinforcements each side gets. So, since they're so central to the gameplay, I might as well start by simply going through how Rhen Harbour's command posts are set up to facilitate its big attacker-defender focus. First things first, the titular Rhen Harbour is a very large, ancient-looking, elevated stone complex, jutting out from a mountainside in a sort of C shape, which one can very easily imagine used to be a place vessels of all sorts were received. Evidently, the ocean or sea it sat at the edge of has now completely frozen over, and the harbour's piers now form a sort of raised courtyard surrounding a completely flat sheet of ice. Every game played here is essentially a mechanised siege, where one team, either the clones of the Republic or the stormtroopers of the Empire, will need to approach and attack this harbour with their faction's respective big, slow command walker vehicle. And the other team, the droids or the rebels, who begin any round controlling the harbour itself, will need to focus on destroying or impeding this giant vehicle and repelling the attack back from their fortified position. The defending team starts with one principal spawn area and command post in a large fortress-like building at the rear of the harbour, with easy access to 2 additional command posts in elevated structures on either side of the harbour's entrance. The fortress at the rear is one of the most defensible locations in all of Battlefront. outright. It sits up off ground level high enough that it's inaccessible from below, save for a handful of narrow staircases. It's lined with about a dozen deadly manable laser turrets, comes replete with a substantial amount of health and ammo dispensing droids, and it incorporates a sort of tiered battlement design along its outer edge that will allow the defenders to perch up on it and shoot at the enemy advancing towards them very easily, whether with a basic blaster rifle, sniper rifle, or explosive area denial weapons. Even in a match where the defenders are put substantially on their back foot, they'll usually still hold this fortress to the bitter end. It's just so strong of a position. The two smaller structures further out can end up going either way, however. They're similarly elevated and armoured, although being closer to the front line and covered in fewer turrets means it is possible that a good showing from the attacker's side can steal one or maybe even both of these away, at least for a time. Still, that won't be easy, since to do that they'll have to probably divert a decent amount of their attention away from pushing further in for a while, and holding territory after you've taken it is always its own challenge. In any case, it also must be mentioned that the natural icy courtyard formed inside the frozen harbour is also the spawn point for a bunch of vehicles for the defenders' side. Every round starts out with a bunch of respawning tanks stationed here. Their designs will vary depending on what era you're playing in, but regardless of what design they are, their function is the same. You can either keep these tanks close to your backline, essentially using them as very powerful mobile artillery pieces that can be used to take out anyone who gets too close, or you can even try to go on the offensive with them a little bit. You surely won't be able to turn back the entire enemy team with just these tanks, but they can help you delay the attackers and thin out their numbers a little bit if you roll out with them at the very start of the match. You get all the tools you'll need to put up a decent fight as the defenders. Your basic soldier class will be as useful here as ever, being the backbone of your army. Your technicians will be indispensably useful for maintaining your vehicles and your turrets and your health and ammo dispensers, especially later in the match, when all those things will likely have taken a fair bit of damage. And of course, if you know how to use the heavy demolitions class properly, they'll be great assets to your team. Their rockets and mines are ideal for taking on the attacker's big command vehicle, and if you keep some situational awareness about you, you should be able to avoid getting insta-killed by them by maintaining your distance and making smart use of cover. All this said, the defender's position is, of course, only half the battle. So let's talk about what you're doing on the other side. If you choose to play as the attackers here, either the Republic or the Empire, you'll be starting with comparable resources and total territory, but the opposite goal, naturally. Your task here will be to use your major command vehicle, either an AT-TE or AT-AT Walker, to assault the harbour directly and capture all the defenders' control points, or just bleed them dry of all their reinforcements while trying. Your big walker itself starts quite some distance from the harbour, and even at full speed, it will probably take you a few minutes to lumber it close enough to the enemy to start engaging them properly. But on your way to the battle, and as long as it stays intact, this walker is itself one of your command posts, and your reinforcements can spawn in directly at it. All the more reason to make sure to keep it alive, if its long-range heavy firepower wasn't already enough. But apart from your big walker, as the attackers you will have at least one conventional, regular command point of your own. At the other edge of the map, as far away as possible from the harbour fortress, is your own staging ground for this assault. You've got a spawn point here, and some smaller tanks of your own, which you can use to escort your command vehicle up to the front, or you can always speed off ahead of it to try and preempt the defenders before they get completely ready, or try to take out their own vehicles before they become a big problem. Still, this staging ground area is really just a last resort for if your walker goes down. If you spawn in here late into a match, especially without any vehicles ready, it's a very long walk back to the fight. But regardless of exactly how you choose to approach the harbour, you've got a number of options when it comes to what classes are good to play here. Of course, your regular blaster rifle infantry will be good here if you know how to use them well. Snipers can be a surprisingly effective choice too, since you've got such long sightlines on this map. You just need to catch an enemy unawares and out of cover for a split second if you're a decent shot. And, worth mentioning, the flying jet troopers and dark troopers the two attacking sides will have access to will be your best option for trying to directly rush those elevated positions if you're feeling particularly brave. And any conversation about Rhen Harbour would be incomplete if you didn't at least touch on this map's iconic ice caves too. This ice cave is essentially just a small, winding tunnel that acts as a sort of narrow back passage into the harbour courtyard area. You most likely won't really be trying to push in through here. Your focus should always be on the main assault. But I like to think of this area as a sort of pressure release valve for the battle. It's secondary to the big fight going on outside, and it's far too small for really more than a few troops to go through effectively at once. But it's good to know it's here, and it's definitely a cool little bit of visual design too. All in all, Harbour is a very simple map, centred wholly on a very simple, if intense, sort of fight. But I think it's very clear why this one became a fan favourite. You get a sort of cohesiveness of gameplay here that you don't get on every map in Battlefront, where the fighting is usually more spread out and not about a single push and pull dynamic between the teams. All the more impressive then, when you remember that the developers had to design the look and feel of this location all themselves, without any reference material from the movies to work off of. That said, Harbour isn't the only great map in the game, and if you might like to hear me break down what makes so many other Battlefront maps so good, there will be a Battlefront map analysis playlist linked at the top of the description, or you can subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next video. Either way, goodbye for now, and have a lovely day.